Okay, so if you're watching this video, more than likely you're already familiar with the directions on this assignment here. So I'm just going to get straight to doing the code. Okay, so the first thing is to create a class called restaurant that includes three pieces of information: name, address, and gratuity rate. Okay, so then let's go ahead and do that. We'll call this file restaurant. Okay, I'm going to hide the Solution Explorer for a bit. Maybe we can see this a little bit better. Okay, so the first thing we start out with is using system, and then the class declaration, public class restaurant. Okay, this is going to be the end of the class. Okay, so this class has three pieces of information: name, address, and gratuity rate. Okay, so normally when we declare the attributes of the class, we set the instance variables, we set them to private, right? So private name is probably going to be a string. That'll be the best data type. Private address, no, private string address. Okay, and then gratuity rate. For this one, probably be a good idea to use a double. Okay, and keep in mind that gratuity rate is going to be the percentage of gratuity. How much do you usually tip, right? Normally, we usually tip 15% of whatever the total bill is, right? So that 15% is what we're storing here, not the actual amount of gratuity, right? So let's say your bill is only $10. The actual amount of gratuity you're paying is $1.50. Is that right? Yeah, I think so. But here, what we're storing is not that. We're storing the actual rate itself. So we're storing the 15%, or if you really like their service, then that's a 20% or 30%, right? That's what's stored here in this variable. Okay. So now that we're done with the first part, I'm going to use the highlighter tool. Okay, so that's already enabled. So then I'm going to highlight that. We've completed that part of it, right? Okay, so now the next thing, provide properties with get and set accessors for all instance variables. So we have three instance variables, so that means we'll have three properties. Do not allow negative values for gratuity rate. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so okay, the properties. Let's do the first one for, and then remember that the accessibility of the properties has to be public. That way other classes can use it, right? The only thing that's private are these, because we don't want anyone getting direct access to them. Okay, so there's the first one. You can actually even type them all out like this. set them up first and then go back in and fill them in. And then keep in mind that the convention is the properties capitalized. The private instance variable is lowercase. So then now we have get, return, name. Yeah, and make sure that it returns this guy here. Don't return the same thing. You'll get a stack overflow error if you do that, because it's just going to be returning the property, and then it's going to call the property, and then the property is going to return the property, and it'll be an ongoing loop forever. So that may have happened to you sometimes. That's why. Okay, and then we set the name equal to the value assigned to the property. Okay, same thing for address. Okay, and then here for gratuity, the get, we don't need to do anything really special with it, just return the rate. However, for the set we do. Okay, so let's take a look at the instructions again. Okay, so we've done this part here. Provide properties with get set accessors for all instance variables. We've done that. This we haven't done yet. Do not allow negative values for gratuity rate. Okay, so one way to do that, the easiest way, is to say that if value is greater than 0, or maybe greater than or equal to 0, then we'll set the gratuity rate to value. Right, so the only way that the value being assigned to the property is going to be assigned to the private instance variable is if the value is greater than or equal to 0. It really needs to be greater than 0, because by default, we can actually take this off, because by default this guy here is already 0, right? Anytime you have private instance variables, they're automatically assigned their default value. So this string would be null, null, and this guy here would be 0.0, right? So the only way we're going to set the value is if the value is greater than 0, right? So let's say they type -1. Is -1 greater than 0? It's not. So then that value coming in, being assigned to the property, it won't work. It won't happen, right? The only time that the value that whatever the enter types or uses is if it's greater than 0. Then the value will be assigned. And here, make things a little bit more readable. End of property. Okay. So now we have our properties, and now we're not going to allow any values, any negative values. So we can highlight that as well. We finished that. Okay, so the next thing, define a constructor that uses name, address, and gratuity rate as parameters and initialize all three values. Okay, so let's do that. So constructor here. Here I might zoom out a little. Okay. So then the constructor always has to be public. Constructor is also the same name as the class. So in this case it's restaurant. Okay. So define a constructor, we did that uses name, address, and gratuity rate as parameters. That we haven't done, but we'll do that right now. So string name, string address, double gratuity rate. Okay, so we have all three of those that uses that as parameters. So we've defined the parameters here and initialize all three values. Okay, so the values we're talking about here are going to be these guys, but we don't access these directly. We use the properties, right? So that's what they're for. So name equals name. So the parameter name, which is this one here, right? Then address, the address property. Again, this goes with this here. And then finally, gratuity rate. Yeah, so that's the property, and that's that guy here. Okay, so we finished that. Now we need a method called generate receipt. Okay, so let's define a method. The method is probably going to be used by other classes, so we need to make sure it's public. Oh, it also has to have a return type, right? In this case, the best return type would probably just be void, right? Because it's going to display several things. It's not just going to return one single value. So the easiest thing is to do is just set it to void. Okay, make sure it doesn't need any, well, no, it doesn't have any parameters, unlike the constructor. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at this method to see exactly what it's supposed to do. Okay, so let's read this method over. Okay, so your class must also include a method to generate a sales receipt. Using a sentinel controlled while loop, the method will collect a price for each food item ordered, and it will keep a subtotal for an arbitrary number of food items. Once the subtotal of all food items has been calculated, the method will then determine the amount for gratuity if the party consisted of 6 or more people. The grand total will be the subtotal plus gratuity. The method must also display the amounts for subtotal, gratuity, and grand total. Okay, so upon expecting these instructions, there are several clues here that we can use to determine what type of variables we need um, to accomplish this behavior. Right, so perhaps maybe subtotal might be one, gratuity is another one, and then maybe grand total. All right, and then if we look at the example, we can see here we're taking in several things. Right, so let me zoom in a bit here. Right, so see, we're entering a price. Right, so price is probably going to be another variable. And then here we have a question being posed: is how many people in your party? So if the party consisted of 6 or more people, right? So obviously we're keeping track of people. So people's probably going to be another variable here. And then since this is a sentinel control loop, okay, yeah, I guess because it's going to be terminate using a -1. That -1 is being entered as the price, so we won't need an extra variable for that, right? Price will double as both a price for the food item and also as the sentinel variable. Okay, so that's a good start, right? So let's declare these variables that we might need. Notice I just went through and all I did was I looked at the different nouns that were here. Right, some of the nouns we may not need. Food item, there's no need to store that as a variable. Right, but some of these other things I highlighted, probably we'll need those. Okay, so first of all, double price. Let's see, maybe double subtotal. And the reason I chose double for price is because looking at upon the example, $6.99, that's I can't store that in an integer. I need a double or a decimal. Double's the easiest one to use, so I'll use double. Let's see, gratuity. Right, and keep in mind that this is the amount of gratuity, not the gratuity rate. Right, gratuity rate has been is saved elsewhere. It's saved up here. Right, so if you want to, you could be more specific and call this variable gratuity amount. Now it's a little bit easier to understand, and you don't get confused. What else? We have subtotal. We also have a grand total. We could try to declare a double of grand total. And also the other thing we need is the amount of people, right? Now, keep in mind that when you're counting people or counting objects, normally we do it with an integer, right? You can't. There's no such thing as 6.5 people or 7.8 people, right? We only have either 6 or 7 or 8 or 10. So using a double for people wouldn't make any sense. So we'll use integer. Okay. So let's try that with these variables. Okay, so first thing, using a sentinel control while loop, the method will collect the price for each food item ordered. Okay, so let's do that. So while, and then we'll come back to the condition. I'll zoom in here a bit. Maybe for now we'll just set it to true. Right, that would get rid of that error. Then we'll go back and put in the actual condition that we need. Right, so the method will collect the price for each food item. Right, so we need to ask for the price. So we do console dot write line, or actually just write, enter price of food item. Okay, so looking at the example, we have a message here to the user in brackets that says -1 to quit. So that right there is your clue on what your condition should be for your Sentinel control loop, right? So here we're entering the price. Here we're telling the user if they put a -1 for the price, then the loop should terminate, right? So then that means that the loop will only run if the price is not -1, right? So price does not equal -1, right? And then we have an error. If you put your cursor over there, it says use of unassigned local variable price, right? So we're trying to test the condition here before we've assigned anything to price, right? So right now, because this is a local variable, by default it does not come with it doesn't come with a default value, right? So we have to assign it ourselves. So the fact that we have this error, then maybe since we don't have any items or prices yet, we can just simply set it to 0. Right, now the error goes away. Right, so is 0 not -1? That's a true statement, right? Because 0 is not -1, so then we'll ask at least for one item here. Then the user is going to enter the price. So then price equals whatever the user types. Right? And then we, of course, we have an error because price is a double. So we need to convert whatever the user types into the appropriate data type. So we need to convert it to a double. Convert to double. Okay, so this part is starting to make sense now. So then it'll keep getting a price until the user types this -1. Okay, so are we done yet? Let's see. Okay, so using a Sentinel control while loop, the method will collect the price for each food item ordered, and it will keep a subtotal for an arbitrary number of food items. Okay. The thing is, this loop runs an arbitrary number of times because we don't know when the user is going to decide to type a -1. So the loop will keep running until the user decides that it's time to quit. Right? So we can use this loop to add our subtotal. Right? So subtotal is going to equal subtotal plus price. Right, and then again we have a problem because we haven't set subtotal to anything. Since we, at this point here when the variables are being declared, there hasn't been any items added up, so there is no subtotal. So we'll just initialize everything to 0. Right, and it'll probably be a safe idea to do that for everything else. It's not always necessary, but in cases where you're going to use the value before it's been initialized, then yeah, it is a problem. Okay, so like here. So now we have 0 plus whatever they enter. So if we look at the example, that'd be $6.99 plus 0, which equals $6.99. Right, so let's say that's like $7. Then, since they didn't enter a -1, then it's going to run again. And then let's say this time they enter $5. So then $7, or I'm sorry, they entered $7 the first time. So then the subtotal is at 7. Then at the second time they enter 5. So then 5 plus 7 is 13. So then subtotal becomes 13. Right? So the subtotal keeps incrementing as the user enters new prices. Okay. But then let me ask you a question. What happens if the user decides it's time to quit? And let's say the subtotal is at $13. So 13 plus -1 is going to be 12. So we're going to be off by $1 because of the sentinel. Right? So the easiest way to solve that, you could either encase this statement in an if statement, or you could just put this, cut it out, and then put it at the top. So then now that -1 won't affect you, or it won't affect the subtotal, because the minute they enter -1 here, then it'll repeat, go back to this condition, and when this condition is no longer true, because -1 is -1, or -1 does equal -1, then you'll break out of the loop. Right, and it won't subtract it from the subtotal. Okay, so that should be working okay. Now let's get rid of this. Okay, so once the subtotal of all food items has been calculated, the method will determine the amount for gratuity if the party consisted of 6 or more people. Okay, so then here we need to determine how many people there were in the party. So then we need to ask for that. Okay, so that we already have a variable set up for that. So people equals console dot readline. Of course, we have an error because people is integer, so convert to int32. Okay, so then now we know how many people we have. So then here might be a good idea to calculate the gratuity. Right? So gratuity at this point is 0. Alright, so we're going to change that. If people is greater than or equal to 6, right? Because the party, if it consisted of 6 or more people, which is right here, then we're going to figure out the gratuity amount. So gratuity amount equals, right? So that would be the subtotal, however much they spent, times the gratuity rate. Right? So you're only going to give a tip, you're only going to give a tip based on how much you've spent. Right? So then all you do is just multiply it by that rate, and then that amount will be applied here to the gratuity amount. Okay. So then the last thing would be figuring out the grand total. Grand total is going to be the subtotal plus the gratuity amount, right? And if we could have made this program a little more complicated, we could have also applied tax. So it would be subtotal plus tax plus gratuity amount, right? But we didn't do that, because then we would also need another instance variable to maybe store tax rate. So it can be done, and just try to keep it a little bit simple. Okay, so then now we look at our program. Program displays subtotal, it displays the gratuity, and it displays the grand total. Alright, so let's try to do that here. Okay, so console dot write line okay, so what are we going to put here? Looking at the example, that's subtotal, and then here a placeholder, then we input the subtotal there. The next line shows the percent for gratuity, and then the gratuity amount. Okay, so that's easy. We'll do that. So here what you can do is you can put one placeholder, and then here you type gratuity, and then another placeholder. Oh, sorry, forgot the double quotes. So then here we're going to display the rate, and then here we're going to display the actual gratuity amount. Okay, and then the last thing is just to show the grand total. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Hopefully it works. It should. So we need to test to see if it works, right? The way we usually do that is go to Solution Explorer, create a new file. We'll call this restaurant class. Oh, I'm sorry, restaurant test. Okay, so then using system, okay, so this is a test application. We need to have the main method. Okay, so what does the instructions say? Create a test app called restaurant test. Oops. Always read the directions. Okay. To demonstrate the capabilities of the restaurant class, create one restaurant object and generate a sales receipt. In the example, I used 0.15 gratuity rate. Okay. So to create an object, so restaurant, call it obj equals new keyword, and then we need the constructor, right? So we have a string name, we have a string address, and we have the rate. So in my example, I used Taco Palenque, but you can use any other restaurant you want. Use Dairy Queen. The address is 123 Main, and the rate I used is in the example, and that way you can test, just make sure it works. You can use the same values I used here. We can do 0.15. Okay, so now we have the object, and then so we've done this part here. Next thing is to generate a sales receipt, right? We wrote a method just for that purpose, right? So we're just going to call that method. That's what it's for. Okay, so let's see what happens. Okay, so enter the price of a food item. We'll do $6.99, $4.99, $1.99, $2.69, and then we'll end the portion of acquiring the prices, -1. How many people in the party? We had 8. Press enter. So we had a subtotal of $16.66. We have 250. We have this, right? So we can actually go back and format some of this stuff, so that way it looks more like the example, right? Just wanted to show you the main components of it actually working, right? So it's almost there. It's almost there. Not perfect. Right, so first of all, we didn't display the name or the address, right? So where can we do that? You could choose anywhere you want. You could even display it here if you wanted to, in the main, or you could display it when the receipt is being generated. Alright, so this is one place you can put it. So console dot actually, you know what? I'd rather do it in the main. Okay, I'd rather do it here before the receipt is being generated. Right. So console dot right line obj. We have a property that already has that information. So name, and then we can just copy this guy here, and then we can do address. Okay, that's one way. You can either do it here, or you could get this and put it in the actual generate receipt. It doesn't matter. The thing I wanted to show you though was here. We need to format the output. So here we're going to format that as currency. Here for the gratuity rate, we're going to format that as a percentage, so capital P. Format this guy as C, and then format this guy as C as well. and save all. Right, okay, so now it's showing the name of the restaurant. $6.99, $4.99, $1.99, $2.69, -1. How many people in the party? We had 8. Right, so now it formatted as a percentage here. After I put the P, it even put the percent sign. Here, the rest of this looks more like currency. You're pretty much done. The other thing you need would be these little lines here. But that you should already know how to do, not too hard. But that's pretty much it.